It was late afternoon in Montgomery, Alabama. The sun draped lazily over the rooftops, casting a burnt gold sheen across the cars. The heat made the asphalt shimmer like a mirage, and the air felt heavier than usual. On that forgotten downtown corner, the hum of engines was abruptly cut by a siren, sharp, urgent, and domineering. A black, unassuming car slowed to a stop at a police checkpoint. Its tires squealed softly on the hot pavement. The driver, a middle-aged black man in a modest suit, with a calm demeanor, rolled down the window with his elbow. There was no visible violation, no rush, no words. "License and registration, now," demanded the tallest officer, buzz-cut, dark sunglasses under his wide-brimmed hat, stern expression, hand hovering near his holster. The man didn't flinch. With measured movements, he leaned over, opened the glove box, and retrieved the documents. His gaze was direct, respectful, but void of submission. "Here you go. And you think you can drive around here like you're one of us?" The officer sneered, flashing a crooked smile, clearly enjoying the attention of his fellow cops watching from beside the cruiser. The man said nothing. His silence seemed to irritate them more than any words would have. "Is there a problem, sir?" asked a second officer, younger, probably still in training. His voice wavered slightly, like he recognized the absurdity of the situation but didn't dare step in. "No problem," the man replied, eyes still locked on the first officer. And then, the unimaginable happened. The white officer, the one with the cold eyes and the hardened face of unchecked authority, spat. A jet of pure contempt struck the man square in the face. Time froze. The city noise faded, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. One of the officers in the background turned his face away. Another stared at the ground. None of them spoke. None of them moved. The man stood still and took a long breath. His eyes held no rage, no fear, only a deep ancestral sorrow, as if this wasn't the first time he'd lived through this. Slowly, he reached into his inner jacket pocket, pulled out a handkerchief, and wiped his face. His dark suit stood in sharp contrast to the dusty street, and the subtle glint of his watch hinted at someone of quiet importance. He looked the spitting officer straight in the eye. "Have a good day, officer." And just like that, he got back into the car and turned onto the side street, pausing only to glance once more into the rearview mirror. The officer laughed loudly, mockingly, as if he'd just won a personal battle. "That's how you deal with arrogant types," he said to his colleagues, expecting applause. But none came. Across the street, the black car pulled over again, this time in front of the Montgomery Police Department. The man stepped out with the same calm he'd shown earlier. He adjusted his shirt cuffs, grabbed a leather folder from the passenger seat, and walked toward the building's main entrance, where a sergeant inside greeted him with a subtle nod. Outside, the officer was still chuckling. Inside, the clock read 5:58 p.m., 2 minutes before the start of an emergency meeting that would change the course of that precinct. And the man who had been spat on, he wasn't just any civilian, far from it. But who was this man in the simple suit with the unwavering gaze? Why did he walk so confidently toward the heart of the building where he'd just been humiliated? And more importantly, what would he do when he came face to face with his aggressors? From the inside. The interior of the Montgomery Police Department held that familiar scent of burnt coffee, mixed with the sterile chill of hallways that were just a bit too clean, as if the spotless floors were trying in vain to erase the invisible stains of inequality that had built up within those walls for decades. The man in the modest suit walked slowly through the concrete maze, where photos of former police chiefs lined the corridors, each proudly framed. White men, stiff smiles, hardened eyes, a gallery of the selective history the institution still clung to. He passed each portrait like someone scanning a mental archive. He stopped in front of one for a few seconds. His reflection in the glass met that of a former chief, the very man who, years ago, had rejected his application to the academy, citing a lack of suitability for the role. No words were needed. His eyes held the response that had taken decades to arrive. "Good afternoon, sir. Can I help you?" asked a young officer who seemed rushed, yet polite. His uniform was crisp, though he still carried the nervous energy of a rookie. "Yes, main conference room, please." The officer hesitated for a beat. The man's tone wasn't arrogant nor unsure. It was steady, measured, and above all, non-negotiable. That alone was enough for the young man to quickly point down the hallway with a simple hand gesture. "Second hallway on the right, room 204. The man nodded slightly and continued on his way. Not rushed, not hesitant, like someone who knew every inch of that building, even if his face was still unfamiliar to everyone inside. Inside room 204, the mood was one of forced casualness. 17 officers were gathered, among them the same cop who had spat on the man just minutes earlier. He was now slouched in a swivel chair, leg crossed, laughing at something he'd just shared with his colleagues. I swear, the guy didn't even blink. Surprised me, honestly. Must be used to getting spat on or something, he joked, drawing a few uneasy chuckles. Sergeant Timothy, a stern-looking man in his 50s, was trying to maintain order, though tension between the senior and junior officers hung in the air. The announcement of a new chief had been kept secret until that very day. No one knew his name. No one had seen his face. All they'd been told was that serious changes were coming. The sound of the doorknob turning silenced the chatter. When the door opened, the man entered. Silent. Back straight. Calm gaze. Leather folder still under his left arm. He closed the door behind him and stood there for a moment, scanning the faces in front of him like a teacher who recognizes each student, not by name but by behavior. It was the spitting officer who broke the silence. "Hey sir, this room is restricted. Internal meeting. You must be lost." Sergeant Timothy stood up immediately. His eyes widened. His hands tensed. "Everyone on your feet." Nobody understood. "Now. At attention." The officers, confused, slowly rose to their feet. The racist officer looked around, still wearing a half smile, thinking it was some kind of joke. Then the sergeant turned to the man in the simple suit with something close to reverence. "Ladies and gentlemen, meet the new chief of the Montgomery Police Department, Mr. Elias Raymond Carter." The impact was instant. The laughter died like a light switched off. The officer, who had spat on him, now visibly pale, couldn't say a word. His hands shook. His eyes couldn't meet the gaze of the man he'd humiliated just moments before. Mr. Carter remained silent for a stretch that felt like an eternity. Then he stepped forward, placed the leather folder on the table, and looked directly at the man who had spat on him. Not with hatred. His stare was precise, firm, challenging. The look of someone who sees not just a single misstep, but the entire system behind it. "It's fascinating how men reveal themselves when they believe they're beyond consequences," Elias said, his voice calm and resolute. He walked slowly around the table, claiming the space as his own, and continued. "I'm not here for applause. I'm not here to be liked. I'm here to remind this institution what it was supposed to be, and just how far it strayed from that path." The room was silent. Some avoided his eyes. Others couldn't look away, caught in a mix of guilt and disbelief. The spitting officer, now identified as Officer Craig Hollister, still had no idea how to respond. His lips were dry. His hands trembled. But deep down, he knew. His career would never be the same after today. Outside the room, the young officer who had shown Mr. Carter the way stood peeking through the crack of the door. In his eyes was something rare, hope. For the first time, he felt it might actually be possible to serve in an institution that was finally starting to change from the inside. But Elias, Carter hadn't come just to take a title. He carried something else in that folder, a dossier, names, evidence. And in the next few minutes, what had seemed like a routine meeting would become a revelation, powerful enough to dismantle decades of untouchable authority. What would Elias unveil, standing before the very men who had tried to break him? The silence in the room was so dense it was almost audible. For the first time, each officer present seemed forced to truly see their own reflection. Not the one they caught in the mirror of routine, but the one now mirrored in the eyes of the man commanding the very space where so many had long considered themselves untouchable. Mr. Elias Raymond Carter did not rush. With composed movements, he unbuttoned his suit jacket and draped it carefully over the back of a chair. The leather folder remained closed on the table. His expression was unreadable, the face of a conductor moments before leading an orchestra of truth. "Take your seats," he said with a small wave of his hand. Everyone obeyed without hesitation, as if some invisible force had swept through the room, dismantling egos and silencing old habits. "This won't be your typical welcome meeting," Elias began, clasping his hands on the table. "Today is not the day we exchange pleasantries and share introductions. Today is the day this department faces itself." He pulled the folder toward him, opened it with a sharp snap, and removed a stack of documents held by a metal clip. He placed them carefully on the table, not like data, but like a dossier of conscience. In the last 5 years, the Montgomery Police Department has accumulated 37 internal complaints of racial misconduct. Of those, 34 were closed without formal investigation. Of those 34, 18 involved officers sitting in this very room. Some eyes widened, others stayed locked on the floor. Take, for instance, the case of Marcus J. Bell, 22 years old, detained without a warrant, assaulted during the stop, then released without charges. The report claimed he resisted. The body cam footage was mysteriously unavailable, but a civilian witness recorded the incident. That footage reached my desk 6 months ago. He looked directly at Officer Craig Hollister, the same man who had spat on him in the street. "Officer Hollister, does that name ring a bell?" Craig wiped the sweat now creeping down his forehead. He said nothing. The room's air conditioning, once barely noticeable, now seemed to blow guilt directly across his face. Elias continued. "There's also the case of Rosa Valdez, mother of 2, approached outside a grocery store under suspicion of suspicious behavior. She was handcuffed for over an hour in front of her children, with no formal explanation. The responsible party? A report signed by Officer Reynolds, verbally backed by 2 colleagues, all of whom are in this room." The discomfort was palpable, but Elias wasn't done. He pulled one final sheet from the folder, slowly, deliberately. He placed it in front of him like a final piece in a game about to flip the board. "Finally, there's an unofficial complaint, submitted anonymously. It describes repeated violent and degrading behavior by one officer during stops in predominantly black neighborhoods, spitting on citizens, mocking them, not out of necessity, but as routine." He leaned slightly forward, eyes locked onto Craig Hollister. "3 days ago, I received a video, footage from today, recorded by one of your colleagues. It won't be shown here and not yet, but it has been submitted to the District Attorney's Conduct Committee as part of a formal inquiry." Craig swallowed hard. His jaw began to quiver. Sir, this is a misunderstanding. He provoked me. There was no ID, I thought." His words stumbled out, weak and crumbling, like a house of cards collapsing under its own weight. Elias didn't respond right away. He simply looked at him. And in that moment, silence was the harshest sentence of all. "I'm not here for a witch hunt, Officer Hollister," he finally said. "But I am here to say, the days of impunity are over, and starting with you is not personal. It's symbolic." He turned to the others. "From this day forward, this department will have zero tolerance for acts of prejudice, abuse of power, or willful inaction. No badge, no years of service, no friendships will shield anyone from the truth." Glances began to cross the room, some filled with relief, others with dread. But something new was taking root in the space, something the walls had long forgotten. Accountability. Each of you will be individually assessed. Mandatory training sessions, one-on-one interviews, and anyone caught trying to interfere with or manipulate the process will face not only administrative action, but criminal consequences. Elias gathered the papers, closed the folder with purpose, and stood. This meeting is over, but the transformation has just begun. He walked out without looking back. Craig remained frozen, eyes lost in some far-off point, as if realizing right then that his career now hung by a thread, not threatened by shouting or vengeance, but something far more relentless: the truth. Outside the room, the young officer who had first met Elias in the hallway quietly stepped toward him. "Chief Carter," he said softly, "I just wanted to say thank you for being here." Elias stopped, turned to him, and smiled for the first time that day. "I'm not here just for me, son. I'm here for you, and for everyone who'll come after you." But not everyone welcomed change with grace. As Elias made his way toward his new office, a quiet conspiracy began to form behind the scenes. Because in every system trying to be reborn, there are always those who'd rather live among the ruins of the old. Who would dare challenge the new chief? And how far would they be willing to go? The new chief's office was still practically empty. Boxes stacked in corners, an old phone sitting on the desk and on the walls, nothing but the echo of past leaderships, most of whom had chosen to preserve the illusion of order over the substance of justice. Elias Carter stood at the window, watching the street below. Outside, the city moved along, indifferent, as if nothing had changed. But he knew real change always began in unseen places. In the gears behind the scenes, in the quiet of decisions, in the stifled hallways of power where the cries of the suffering never reached. The door opened without a knock. It was Sergeant Timothy. "Chief Carter," he said, voice steady but cautious. "We need to talk." Elias turned around calmly, as if expecting him. "Of course, Sergeant. Come in." Timothy shut the door behind him and walked slowly toward the chair across from the desk. He didn't sit right away. His eyes held a mix of respect and tension. A man torn. "I'm not here to defend anyone," he began. "But you need to understand. This department has traditions, its own internal dynamics. Not everyone's going to accept your changes without resistance." "And you, Timothy?" Elias asked, tone measured, never hostile. "Will you resist?" The sergeant paused, then finally took a seat. "I was raised under these rules, sir. Some fair. Others, not so much. But I can recognize when I'm looking at a man who didn't come here to play at leadership." Elias leaned forward, his gaze sharp but calm. "Then tell me, honestly, is there something I should know? Something not in the reports?" Timothy lowered his eyes, took a long breath. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "There's a group, small but influential, senior officers, tied to outside associations, connected with members of the city council. They profit from contracts around the department, private security, arms deals, outsourcing. Your arrival is a direct threat to all of that." Elias leaned back, absorbing it without surprise. "Names?" Timothy hesitated. "Again?" But then, as if finally choosing a side, he murmured, "Hollister's the most visible. But the real organizer is Lieutenant Dwayne Miller. Works in the shadows. Smart. Careful. Poisonous." "Was he at the meeting?" "No. Claimed medical leave earlier this week. But he's been spotted at HQ, quietly rallying allies, spreading rumors." "What kind of rumors?" Timothy sighed. "That you're a political plant, sent here to destabilize the department. And the worst one, that you plan to fire white officers to promote your black friends into key positions." Elias was silent for a few seconds. Then he stood, walked to a bare shelf where only closed folders had been placed, Fear is a powerful fuel, Sergeant, he said, flipping open an empty file. But truth lasts longer. It always does. He closed the folder, turned, and looked Timothy in the eye. I need a favor, and your loyalty. Name it. I want a list, official or not, every active contract, internal, external, vendors, consultants, anything that's not on the surface. That's going to rattle a lot of people. I'm counting on it. Timothy stood. For the first time, he extended his hand firmly. You've got me. Hours later, tension was already boiling beneath the surface of the department. Elias Carter's name spread like wildfire. Some called him a reformer. Others, a threat. Many were still trying to figure him out. But for a particular group of officers, quietly led by Dwayne Miller, the word was different. Obstacle. Gathered in a back room after hours, they exchanged intel, stories, and strategies. He didn't come to lead, Miller said, leaning against the wall, arms crossed. He came to dismantle everything we built. What if we used the Hollister case to spark an internal crisis? An anonymous tip, a leak, anything to turn public opinion against Carter before he gains a foothold, one of them suggested. Miller paused, calculating. Maybe, but I've got a better idea. Let him move forward. Let him dig deep. Let him make enemies. And when he finally hits the most sensitive nerve, we bring him down with his own momentum. Silent nods. The plan was set in motion. The next morning, Elias received a letter with no return address. Inside the envelope, a single sheet. You don't belong here. Not now. Not ever. Leave while you still can. Along with it, a copy of his juvenile record, from when he'd been wrongly arrested at 19 for resisting authority. The incident that had marked him for a life, and now returned conveniently as a threat. He read it with an unchanged expression, then burned the sheet in a small metal ashtray by the window. The ashes rose like smoke from a past he never saw as shame, but as the very root of his fight. But Elias still held one final card, something no one saw coming, a public address. A speech to be broadcast citywide, one that would reveal truths capable of shaking the very foundations of the department and implicating powerful names in local politics. Because sometimes to destroy a corrupt system, you have to shine a light where only silence has lived. The news was confirmed that Monday morning. At exactly 9 a.m., the new chief of the Montgomery Police Department would deliver an official statement, broadcast live on the department's internal channel and shared with the local press. To many, it was just another formality. But to those who knew what was at stake, those conspiring behind closed doors, that microphone was dangerous, a looming threat that long-buried truths might finally be unearthed. Elias Raymond Carter arrived early. He wore a dark gray suit, a plain white shirt, no tie. Discreet, as always. On his face, the expression of a man who carried the weight of many battles, but also the calm of someone who owed nothing to anyone, except the truth. Before him, a small crowd began to gather. Officers, journalists, community leaders, members of the city council. Craig Hollister was there, not by choice, but because he had been formally summoned. Beside him stood Dwayne Miller, the quiet strategist, arms crossed, masking unease behind a hardened stare. The room was packed, yet completely silent. Elias stepped up to the podium. He placed his notes on the wood, looked out over the audience for a long moment, and then he began. Good morning. A pause. The weight of those two simple words landed immediately. Today is not an ordinary day, and this is not an ordinary institution. For decades, this department has acted as a mirror of the city, reflecting what is most courageous in it, and also what is most sick. A few murmurs rose, then faded under the calm conviction of his voice. I could start this speech by offering thanks, pleasantries, or administrative plans. But I'd rather begin with something harder. The truth. He pulled a laminated sheet from his folder and held it up to the cameras. This is my arrest record from 1989. I was 19, no history, no crime. But I was detained, thrown to the ground, handcuffed and charged with resisting authority. All because, and this is in the original report, I hesitated to answer a question about where I lived. The room fell utterly silent. I'm not sharing this out of revenge, but for context, because I know this system, from the inside, and from the outside, and I know its sicknesses, not from books, but from scars. He lowered the sheet. In the last week, I've received veiled threats, blackmail, fabricated dossiers, and I'm here to say I will not back down. His voice lifted, not shouting but carrying weight. I am authorizing the reopening of all closed cases from the past 5 years involving questionable racial conduct. All of them. I'm launching a full audit of every contract and partnership linked to this department, and as of today, body cameras will be mandatory and monitored by an independent committee made up of community representatives. The room pulsed with tension, but it was different now. Not the tension of fear, the tension of transition. Like the final crackle of fire as it clears the ground for something new to grow. Then Elias turned slightly. His eyes found Craig Hollister. Officer Hollister, your conduct is now under formal investigation. Not just for what happened with me, but for a series of complaints that were silenced over the years. Effective immediately, you are suspended from duty until the investigation concludes. This is not retaliation. This is justice, the kind everyone deserves. Hollister tried to speak. He stepped forward. This is personal. You're using your position to— That's enough, Elias interrupted. Not with anger, but with unwavering authority. You had chances to learn, chances to grow. You chose instead to spit on a man, and on the institution you claim to serve. Hollister was escorted out. For the first time, no one stepped up to defend him. In the days that followed, the city responded. Some stood and applauded. Others tried to downplay it, to deflect, to bury it. But the community, the forgotten part of the city, for the first time in a long time, felt seen. Letters of gratitude began arriving. From parents who had lost children during violent stops. From women who had been humiliated. From young people who had abandoned dreams of ever becoming police officers. They wrote to Chief Carter, not out of idolization, but recognition. Months later, the corrupt contracts were suspended. New officers were hired under strict ethical guidelines. Elias was a constant presence in the streets, in schools, in town halls. He listened, he took notes, he acted. The scar from that 1989 record was still there. But now, it was also a badge of honor, a reminder that it is possible to change from within what was built to exclude, not with shouting, but with courage, not with hatred, but with purpose. How many times are people like Elias disbelieved, disrespected, or dismissed before they're heard? How often does prejudice hide behind routine jokes or just the way things are? And how long will we keep normalizing a system that only respects those who arrive wearing privilege? Real justice doesn't always arrive with sirens. Sometimes it comes in silence, but with resolve, with eyes that don't look away, with a man who, even after being spat on, chooses not to strike back, but to rebuild.